Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and honorable members, distinguished guests. This afternoon, we are going to look at session number 5. And it's about presentation on the situation of stateless persons. The issue of stateless persons is a very big issue when we discuss the situation of refugees. Most people are stateless. And the following themes will be highlighted: eradicating statelessness, including best practice examples, highlights of pledges made by African states on statelessness. And we'll also look at the role of parliaments in implementing the pledges. To lead us into the unpacking the issue of situation of stateless persons, we'll start with Ms. Emanuela Mitte, Regional Statelessness Expert, UNHCR Regional Bureau for Southern Africa. Over to you, Ms. Emanuela Mitte, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, it is an indelible pleasure and an honor to take the floor. I've got the presentation which has to appear on the screen. It is in English. That's the reason why I've chosen to speak in French, to balance, to sort of come up with an equilibrium of these two languages. Here you are. Before going deep into the discussion on the roles, or your roles to eradicate statelessness, I'd like to discuss with you on statelessness and what are the consequences, the causality and the statelessness in your countries in Africa, and why it is important to eradicate this plague. To understand statelessness, we have to understand, first of all, what is nationality. Nationality, it is a concept which appears accessible to everyone, whereas we confuse it with a feeling of belonging or of appartenance. We define nationality based on our identification, on the language of a country, given country. We were born in that country. Our parents were born there as well. We identify ourselves linguistically. How many amongst us know the rules of naturalization or acquisition of our citizenship? Whereas nationality is something else. It is not something of belonging. It is not, definitely not. It is, first of all, a legal determination. The question is not about to know whether we are going to belong to that country, but rather to know whether the laws of that country allow us to obtain that nationality. On statelessness in Africa and beyond, I have met people who I've met stateless people who have identified the people who to identify to a country where they're living, whereas the law of that given country is excluding them. So statelessness is an exclusion of a person who from getting the nationality of that given country's citizenship, whereas he has got everything of that country. Statelessness is what? A stateless person is a person who has not nationality, who possesses no nationality, is not considered as a citizen of that country with the application of the laws of citizenship. It is a convention that, it is a definition that we have got from the Convention of 1954. It is a definition, a universal definition in customary laws. We consider it as it is a definition which is accepted by all states. And next slides, please. How does one acquire a nationality or citizenship? Should we respond to this question? Then shall we know how can we not get this nationality? The United Nations have made a lot of researches and identified an essential cause, the main cause of statelessness in the world. It is the law of nationality or the shortcomings of the laws of nationalities, the principles of the acquisition of citizenship. Various countries work around these principles. You may acquire nationality when you are born into a country. This is a practical that you are going to get in the States from America. You may obtain the citizenship through your parents. You may obtain the nationality, the citizenship of your parents. This is the law of blood. This is mainly the rights of blood, which is practiced in around by a lot of African countries. If all nations would have practiced these laws, the rights of blood, and we would not have had a lot of stateless people. These laws are practiced with limitations. In some countries, only the father can transmit the citizenship, not the mother. The rights of blood. What about if a child is born overseas? Then it means that the parent would not transmit or convey his citizenship. The rights of blood. What about the other ethnic groups? They are not considered as the very citizens of the country, and therefore they cannot transmit that citizenship. These are the limitations which are ascribed to the rules of citizenships. The UNHCR consider that every 10 minutes a child is born stateless. What are the consequences of statelessness? A stateless person is he who has not any citizenship, which is defined as a right. You may deduce that a stateless person is he who does not enjoy the right to have citizenship. In principle, the stateless people are the very people who do not have access to the services because of their lack of identity or citizenship. And these are the children who cannot go to school. And when they therefore have to force themselves to go there, they cannot pass exams. It is a cyclic chain of exclusions. And in the most vulnerable situations, this stateless person will find himself or herself in indefinite detentions, or will find him or herself in expulsion situations. Statelessness, it is the most grave violation of human rights. It is a violation of human rights in general. It is a series of violations of human rights. Hence, the importance to eradicate this situation of statelessness. According to the statistics, how many people here? For us to have statistics, to possess them, we need to have the state to share these statistics or mechanism through which they're going to share. Whereas we all know that we do not have tangible statistics. The UNHCR has got only estimation, some forecast or some form of a caveat. Probably the forecast or caveats, you may estimate there are around 10 million stateless people around the world. And how many in Africa? We do not have the numbers, the exact numbers, because nowadays only 5 states who are sharing the statistics. That does not mean that in other countries or in Africa they do not have stateless people. It simply means, it equates simply that other countries do not share these numbers. And these very estimations, forecast or caveats we cannot share with you. But rather we've got the indicators which are frightening, which are not provided by the UNHCR, by the World Bank. We have 5 500 million people in Africa who do not have any documents. We do not say that there are 500 million or half a billion stateless people, but this is an indicator of the prevalence of the risk of statelessness. To obtain these passports, you need a birth certificate to provide it. You need to provide it, and this will establish your identity, and this will push you to know whether you are eligible to citizenship. In 2019, in sub-Saharan African, less half a child out of 1 in 2 of children are not registered for them to obtain a nationality. These are frightening numbers, but they are very paramount. Our UNHCR commissioner, who's now the UN secretary, Mr. Antonio Guterres, said that statelessness is a grave violation of human rights, but as well, it is a violation of human rights, which is a plague. And how are we going to resolve this? How are we going to resolve this? This is an expression of political willingness. This political willingness or will, which is not, which passes by Parliament, because it passes by the Parliament to vote the laws, and the first barrier to citizenship, it's the Parliament. In 2014, our High Commissioner, from this postulate, this posture that we may eradicate statelessness with good political willingness, and did a launch of this campaign called I Belong. And I Belong, which means in French, j'appartiens, which is a campaign which will end in 2024 with a well-defined or defined, articulated objective. It's an ambitious objective, but not very realistic. It's all about the political willingness. In 2019, if you make do your numbers, in the mid of the campaign, on the 8th of October last month, a month ago, states gathered at the executive committee, ESCOM of the UNHCR, to share the outcome, and to discuss about the concrete engagements to eradicate statelessness by 2024. The appeal from our High Commissioner, as you may see, 250 engagements were taken by 66 states, and 35 amongst them are Africans. The majority of African states engaged themselves to eradicate. I may tell you firmly that Africa took solemn engagements, and Western Africa, the most, Central Africa, and the southern part of Africa. Amongst these engagements, we have the law reforms to ensure that the laws may have legal safeguards. And we have the ratification of conventions on statelessness. They are studies on the phenomenon of statelessness in a given country, etc., and etc. Let us look now on the outcome or realizations undertaken by the states from the launch of this campaign. Next presentation, next slide. It is very hard to summarize within 1 minute. You may look from 2014, 5 years ago, the number of realizations or achievements in Africa. 2 important regions that developed action plans to eradicate statelessness: ECOWA region and the Great Lake region. the International Conference for the Great Lake Region, in French, CIRGL. Yes, that's a French acronym. Do you concur with me? It's not very easy. These these regional action plans are very similar because the recipe to eradicate statelessness is the same. We need to meet together in synergy to ratify the conventions, etc. and etc. From the launch of the campaign in 2014, two states which have managed to reform their own legislations and laws to enable the conveyance of citizenship to the children and women. You have two states in Africa which adhered to this convention on statelessness. Namely, we are going to look on those conventions. Most of African states, and this is nothing. This means something. They had elucidated a focal point on statelessness. We may say now we have a rightful interlocutors on statelessness. You have a lot of states who have undertaken studies to understand, comprehend the risk of statelessness and have subsequent numbers on this issue. And at the end, something that is almost negligible, we are talking about sensitization at the regional level, sensitizing the authorities, the experts, the bureaucrats, and the members of the public and communities. This is almost everywhere throughout countries. Before, people did not know that. Now they have been sensitized. They might never have understood, heard about this. Now a lot of people know the situation. The situation is different, thanks mainly to the sensitization policies. Next slides. What are the issues to be resolved? There are many, I might confess, but I'm giving you a proposal to identify two. The first is to adhere to the Convention on Statelessness. We shall see that, and we will see which convention. And the second is to reform the laws. Next slide. You've got two conventions. It is high time for the international community to adhere to the Convention of 1954, to the Convention to cover immigrants, and the Convention of 1961 on the prevention on statelessness. This very convention of 1961 is very important, very paramount, very crucial. If all the states could adhere to this convention and to enable the laws susceptible of granting citizenships, I may say to you solemnly that we may eradicate statelessness. This convention 1961 has got legal safeguards, and the states are to include them so as to avoid stateless children and to avoid that their own citizens become stateless somewhere in a given time. Let us look at the state of ratification in Africa. Just you may see on the slide. In maroon blue, you may see the state which went to the two conventions. And in light blue, you will see the countries that are dear to the Convention 1954 on the protection of the immigrants, and the gray, you may see the country which do not go to those conventions. There's still works to be done to ensure that up from now to 2024, we are showing you, elucidating you, we're giving you a clear picture. This shows, without doubt, that we would have done a better job on statelessness. Ladies and gentlemen, august parliamentarians, this presentation is for you to eradicate statelessness. You've got the powers because you are the one who are legislating. should we have to eradicate statelessness, therefore we need to modify the laws on statelessness so that they may align and be in conformity on the international human rights, international conventions, and these are embedded in a convention 1954. We need to ensure that the children who are born in your own territories, your own countries, acquire the citizenship of your children. And as well, you need to bestow the citizenship on an abandoned child in your own territory. There are other principles to include in the Convention 1961, but here we are talking about two major principles. Another important reform, not aligned to the laws of nationalities, but the laws of foreigners, to ensure that those stateless migrants be recognized as stateless and therefore be protected as stateless people. We're talking about a huge tradition. We are talking about the implementation of internal laws of the Convention 1954 of the stateless people. The next speakers will give you clear examples on the concrete reforms that have been undertaken in respective countries. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Emanuela Mite, for unpacking the issue of stateless persons and the situation of statelessness in Africa. I think that was very comprehensive. We now move on to Mr. Seth Rajolina from Madagascar. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honorable parliamentary colleagues, Your Excellencies, and ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to apologize on behalf of my president, Honorable Priscilla, who will have been with us today, but for professional reasons, she allowed me to speak on her behalf before this conference. The reform of the law on the nationality, going to a national legality of people, and then also granting nationalities to the children. And the committee has chosen to be treated by the delegation of Madagascar. I will begin my intervention with a prehistoric of the nationality and statelessness in Madagascar. The Malgache nationality, according to the constitution, has appeared in 1960, and up to today, the nationality is reside by with the code of the nationality of Madagascar, which is inspired from the French law of the past. So according to the Convention of 1954, relative to the status of stateless people, a stateless person is any person that a state does not consider as the citizen according to the application of their legislation. Simply to mean that a stateless person is someone who is deprived of nationality. So in Madagascar, statelessness has existed since the independence, but the problem was not inscribed in 2011. The UNHCR had a mission of exploration in Madagascar which confirmed the existence of communities that were affected by the phenomenon. And since then, the Madagascar state have had a lot of actions to try and eradicate the phenomenon. In 2016, the Code of Nationality was modified by a law, and this reform has brought the commended advancement in the promotion of the human right. So the significance of and the ability of women from Madagascar to transmit their nationality to their child independently of their marital status. So Madagascar is therefore the first country to be taken out of the list of 27 countries of the world where the law of nationality allows women to transmit automatically nationality to their offsprings. And that shows the firm will of the Madagascar state to fight any kind of discrimination when it comes to women. And that new article also takes into account, it doesn't take account the distinction between a legitimate child stemming from a marriage and in all the instrument of international and newspapers through in Madagascar. So furthermore, thanks to the reform, the birth of an individual as a Madagascar nationality is not. So the sanction is individual to protect statelessness. So the implementation of the new law allowed to remove important cases of statelessness. So 600 nationality citizenship has been delivered since March 2017 in 6 provinces that had available numbers globally around 2,700 people who were stateless, who acquired the nationality of their mothers. And this was subvention before the reform. And that means that the reform started in 2016 was enough to end statelessness in Madagascar. And more than situation of statelessness we still have until today. So in September 2019, and so the action plan, a national action plan for reduction and elimination of statelessness in Madagascar, which will be validated in this month of November. It was elaborated by the leaders and technicians of the Senate and National Assembly, Ministerial Department, National Commission Independent of Human Rights, the media, the organizations, as well as the civil society, as well as the communities that are concerned with statelessness. So the PNRA has kept as a goal to end statelessness in Madagascar from until up to 2024. So to reach this major goal, some actions have been planned in 4 areas mentioned here, namely to resolve major situations of statelessness in applying Article 15, which proclaims that every individual has a right to a nationality. After independence, a group of people appeared without nationality, and migrants dwelling in Madagascar since the 19th century, and giving them a nationality, and this characterizes the major situation of statelessness in the country. And secondly, to remove discrimination which is based on people, the legislation of nationality, allowing to women and men of the same right to transmit their nationality to their spouses that are statelessness, because discrimination towards women on this with the men that are statelessness, which cannot acquire the nationality of their women or their wives. And the women, the same as men, have got the ability to transmit their nationality to their adopted children. And thirdly, to the principle of children, making sure that no child is born stateless. And this application of the African Chart of Right, which the child is rectified by Madagascar. And fourthly, to rectify the Charter of 1954 related to the statelessness and the Convention of 1961 about the reduction of the cases of statelessness. These are, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the experiences of my country on this thematic that I am asking you to appreciate at its right value, and I thank you.
Thank you very much for the very clear presentation. We now have to watch a video. Miss Diana Kijengo was supposed to come, but then we are going to watch a video prepared on the theme. Miss Diana Kijengo is the program manager, Kenya Human Rights Commission. I'm not too sure.
Online. She will be online. She's going to speak from the video.
Yeah, okay, right.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You can hear me? Okay. So I'm Diana Gishengo. I'll be speaking to the experiences of both the Kenyan state and our parliament, both the National Assembly, the Senate, and because we have a devolved system of governance, to some extent, the County Assembly. I'm not too sure whether you can see the, what I have shared, the presentation. Are you able to follow it?
Yes, we have it.
Okay, great. So on the first bit of that presentation, at least you see that's a box that had about 1,500 identity cards of the Makonde community. That was in February 2017, and the president issuing. I see Emmanuel has already discussed the conventions, but this particular presentation and the progress Kenya has made, we will rely heavily on the 1961 convention to see what safeguards we have done. So far in Kenya, after the Constitution of Kenya, we have a Chapter 3 that strictly is on citizenship. And therein is where we start our journey of addressing our problems of nationality and statelessness. Scholars who have studied Africa say Kenya has one of the complex issues of nationality and statelessness. Those of us who live there, sometimes we don't feel it, but after interacting with some of these communities, we see it in a sense to be a bit more complex. And listening to Madagascar that have been able to easily address their issues, then maybe our issues are somewhat complex. So our constitution removed gender discrimination, particularly where women would deliver outside the country, because if you're a Kenyan woman and you deliver it outside the Kenyan physical territory, then you're not able to pass nationality to your children. But this was removed, and so men and women can pass nationality to their children as well as their spouses. In our constitution, we also have a presumption of citizenship by birth for all children who are found on Kenyan territory and are below the age of 8 years. The constitution also allowed for dual citizenship, and then it allowed for naturalization of persons who've been lawfully resident in Kenya for 7 years. And then in the Bill of Rights, it incorporates the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child by having a clause that requires that takes note every child has a right to a name and nationality from birth. And later, as I discuss the draft protocol on aspect of statelessness and nationality in Africa, you will see that borrowing from the African Charter, parts of which are then properly domesticated in the Kenyan Constitution, we are already trying to apply the doctrine of attribution of nationality from birth as a way of reducing citizenship. We also have two legislations after the Constitution of Kenya 2010. The first one is the Kenya Citizenship and Immigration Act, and then we also have the Kenya Citizens and Foreign National Management Service Board. So the first one is the board is responsible for managing all issues of citizenship, statelessness, and so on. While the act is a law that then tries to bring about how to go about the application of the law on citizenship in Kenya. Linked to this, these were not passed after the Constitution, but they have been amended to try and comply. Is the Registration of Births and Deaths and the Registration of Persons Act, because issues of statelessness and citizenship, until they are best illustrated by whether you have the necessary documents, whether you have an ID, are you able to get a birth certificate, are you able to get a passport, and so on. So the laws governing issuance of those documents then become very, very relevant to our topic today. So in the law that was passed by our parliament in 2012, then I won't go into the aspect of Kenyan citizens by birth, because that was determined from the time we moved from our colonial period to our independence in 1963, where all indigenous communities, but there was an aspect of discrimination. 42 indigenous communities were considered indigenous, and those were considered Kenyan by birth, and thereafter Kenyan citizenship by birth is passed by descent. So at least one of your parents must be a citizen. Some communities were left out, like the Makonde, who are from Mozambique, the Shona, who are from Zimbabwe, and are everywhere in Southern Africa. They're in South Africa, they are in Zambia, there are scores in Tanzania, and we have a population in Kenya as well. So in the Act, the Kenya Citizenship and Immigration, we have people who are entitled to citizenship. And this has a strong linkage to keeping family ties. So the people who are entitled are spouses who are married to Kenyans for a period of 7 years, and they must have valid proof of that marriage. And then widows and widowers who are married to Kenyan citizens, but their spouses passed away before they could naturalize. So those are also entitled. And then after that, the people who are entitled are adopted children of citizens, Kenyan citizens, and even where a citizen naturalizes, their children now become entitled to citizenship. Then in addition to this category, we also have an aspect where anybody who was a Kenyan citizen and lost their citizenship when Kenya did not have provisions for dual nationality can be able to regain that. And those, it's a matter of right, no negotiation. Then we have a category of people who are said to be eligible. So eligible means the state has discretion to determine whether to grant you citizenship or not. And first category is people who have been lawfully resident in Kenya for a period of 7 years. By lawfully resident, it means you had a residence permit continuously renewed for 7 years and you intend to continue living there. So you pay a fee of $2,000 and you're able to become a Kenyan citizenship. The second category of people who are eligible is the stateless persons and migrants. These ones, theirs is a bit complex because one, for you to be eligible, you must have been in Kenya in 1963, 12 December, when we got our independence. And you have continued to live lawfully in Kenya and you have proof of that residence to date, okay? And then linked to this category is children, so descendants of these stateless people and long-term migrants. This is where we have seen our parliament come in to put pressure on the executive, working with civil society to ensure that these communities are recognized. Why? Because for the longest time, these people migrated at some point. Say the Makonde came in as migrant workers to work on settler farms in the 1930s. We have people like the Shona who migrated as missionaries. Some had documents, the Shona missionaries had documents, but only 11 of them. That population has grown to 2,000. After the first entrance, in the early 1960s, nobody else was issued with documents. So these people live in Kenya, and from the list of our honorable members in Kenya, there are also people who are found in Kericho, Kakamega, parts of Western Kenya, who are migrants, long-term migrants who came to work here, particularly from Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo, and they live in those areas. So they have no way of proving that they have documents. So we have seen members of parliament work very well with communities. We start from the county assembly. So the county assembly do their own fact finding and compile a report, which they then submit to the Senate. The Senate then makes a determination and advises through their committee on security and foreign relations. They then advise the cabinet secretary responsible for matters of citizenship in Kenya to recognize those communities. Once that is compiled, we work with the communities to submit a petition to the National Assembly, relevant committee as well, for their action. We did this with the Makonde. It took a lot of pressure, but because it was a technical and a new area, it took much longer. It took about 4 years before we could make headways in parliament and finally with the executive. And so these people recognized. Okay, so I'll pause there so that I quickly go into the AU, the African Union draft protocol on aspects of nationality and eradication of statelessness in Kenya. Okay, so this protocol was developed initially by the African Commission, and it was a result of many years of the African Union, particularly the African Commission on Human Rights, Commission on Human and People's Rights, recognizing there is a problem on matters nationality on the African continent. They had received a number of cases, and they used to determine them on the basis of, say, human dignity, equality and non-discrimination, rights to have a home, a house, land, and things like that. But they dug into the history, and in the drafting of the African Charter, there was initially a clause, the same way as the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. There was a clause in nationality. But at the point of passing the African Charter, African states said this was a very controversial issue. So the African Commission raised this with the African Union, and the African Union, through the Summit of the Heads of State, recognized there was a serious issue of determining nationality, particularly because most of the communities would fall in between the cracks, or they are transnational. Border communities, it's not clear who belongs where. And now that there is a new push to have an African citizenship, African passport, then the African Union Commission okayed the drafting of the protocol in 2016. The protocol has 3 objectives. The first one is to respect the right to a nationality in Africa, and then establish obligations and responsibility of states on nationality aspect in Africa. Then thirdly, make sure that statelessness in Africa is eradicated. I'm sure the room has many experts on statelessness, but I do recognize that if you look at the UN convention, some of them, because the development of those states is slightly different from how African states developed post-colonialism. So we needed to try and ensure we respond to our own context. So one, this protocol, it's currently going before the Specialized Technical Committee on Legal Affairs, the final process before it's put up for adoption. So one, it enlarges the definition of statelessness so that it also includes people whose nationality cannot be determined, because issues of nationalities are both an issue of law and fact. So you're not sure where to place somebody, but they clearly would not fit into any country. So it is not so much that they are not recognized by a state, but once a state determines that this person cannot be recognized anywhere, or if their nationality is undetermined, they've never owned documents, then they would be considered statelessness and eligible to the protections and safeguards available to stateless people. It also, unlike most international instruments, it has a definition section, because this issue is it's a lived reality for most Africans, yet whenever you speak to both members of parliament, technocrats in the executive, it is somewhat technical. Not technical like NASA going to the moon, but it has its own technicalities. So it was deemed fit that we have a definition section to guide the states, and thereafter to even make it easier for parliament, once this is adopted, in domesticating these laws in their country. I really like this one because, unlike you heard me say, in Kenya, whether you're stateless or you have been if you're seeking naturalization, you must have lawful residence. But most of the populations cannot qualify because they've never had lawful residence. What they have is habitual residence, meaning they have always lived there. Since time immemorial, that's their only home. So it is urging African states to be cognizant. I like using the examples of Kenya and our neighbors, Tanzania and Uganda. For instance, Kenya is slightly advanced in the issuance of the ID system, because IDs were used because we were a colonial settler state, but also our government in 1978 made a national identity card universal. Uganda did that much more recently, and Tanzania even more recent than Uganda, meaning that most people are coming to terms with the fact that they are not eligible to be issued with documents now. They've never required a permit. But for their issues to be resolved, the only thing they can cling to is habitual residence. Then it has very expansive safeguards against all forms of discrimination that take into account clans, religious affiliation, indigenous communities, ethnicity, and so on. It also promotes and creates mechanism for determination of nationality for pastoralist community, some of whom, in the search of pasture, they then they have to go across a number of African states, and sometimes say again in the East Africa region, the Elami Triangle, the pastoralists there will decline to take up nationality documents because they can be restrictive for their pastoralist activities. But then if we create mechanism for ensuring they're recognized and still allowed to graze using their usual grazing partners, then we would be able to resolve their problems. Then it recognizes not just dual nationality, but multiple nationality. Why? Because in Africa, we have polygamous family. Our families would then sometimes be in more than one country. So we recognize that in all those countries, we have an appropriate connection that needs to be recognized and safeguarded. So that's the reason for multiple nationality as opposed to dual nationality. And finally, it creates mechanism for interstate similar to the UN Convention, where we can go for arbitration before the International Court of Justice. But in Africa, it recommends, particularly the regional blocs, to come together and create mechanisms to address particularly border communities and the challenges that they face. Okay, so I would pause there and just indicate then after the 2017 election, we revived our engagement with parliamentarians on issues of citizenship, issuance of IDs, and statelessness. And earlier this year, 2019, we established the Kenya Citizenship Caucus to try and look into issues of citizenship, statelessness, legal identity in Kenya. They have been raising questions on the House of Parliament. You can see photos there of their first press conference after they were established, and a subsequent meeting of members of Parliament together with leaders of stateless communities. What has this caucus done so far? So first, it has engaged the cabinet secretary responsible for matters of citizenship, and as a result of that engagement, in late August, 23rd August this year, Kenya re-established a task force on statelessness, which was given an initial mandate of 1 year to have resolved all known cases of statelessness. It has also mobilized its own constituents who are stateless to ensure and support them in getting available documents like birth certificate. So within this period, the Shona have managed to get birth certificate through the support of the caucus, civil society organization, and the UNHCR. The ministry has finally issued them with certificates. They have lodged mass applications for registration as Kenyan citizens on account of their statelessness, again, supported by members of the caucus. And currently, the caucus also identified that the laws for stateless persons and long-term migrants are discriminatory, and they have a higher burden for a population that is very, very vulnerable and marginalized. Because for somebody with other citizenship and lawful residence, all they require is 7 years. But for stateless persons currently, they would require to show that they have lived in Kenya for over 55 years. So that's disproportionate, and so they are putting forward amendments to remedy that, lower the burden of proof in terms of document, and expressly waive the administrative requirements that weigh on stateless communities and make it very, very difficult for them to access the much required remedy of citizenship. I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the powerful video on the Kenyan experience with statelessness and citizenship. Thank you very much. Our last presenter for this segment is Dr. Agnes Fadai, Chair, IPU Committee on the promotion of, IPU Committee to promote respect for international humanitarian law. Over to you, Dr. Agnes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable colleagues, let me start by thanking you for giving me the second opportunity to exchange with you as the chair of the IPU-IHL committee. Our committee is dealing on one hand with refugees and the other hand, of course, with the question of statelessness, thus supporting very much the United Nations and statelessness campaign, which was initiated by the UN Secretary General. Before going straight to the points, about the various roles and strategies for the MPs to address statelessness, let me tell you two interesting stories about statelessness. The EXCOM meeting in 2019 in Geneva, there is always a side event, the Nansen Award ceremony. This year's Nansen Award winner was a Kyrgyz lawyer, Azizbek Ashurov. And the reason why I'm mentioning him is because in the past decade, he spent his time as a lawyer with a team to ensure that those 10,000 people who live up in the Kyrgyz mountains would receive Kyrgyz citizenship. And the reason why he had to do that, because with the end of the Soviet Union, they lost their Soviet citizenship. And as they were living very far from those offices, which would give this, the necessary documents, they were stateless. So this is one method, unfortunately, how you become stateless. You were not moved, your status wasn't changed, they were not marrying anybody from a foreign country, they were staying in the same village. Simply, the state disappeared, and a new state was born, and bureaucracy was quite difficult up in those hills, in those mountains. So Aziz Bagashirov, as a lawyer with a team, helped these people to have the documents and thus receive their Kyrgyz citizenship and then receiving everything. The second story is of Maha Mamo, who is a leading figure of actually the End-Statelessness campaign. She was born as the daughter of a Syrian Muslim woman and a Syrian Christian man. We all know love doesn't have color, doesn't have a religion. Love is love. It doesn't matter. If you love each other, you can be from different religions, you can be from different countries. Well, it cannot be stopped. But unfortunately, the law stopped them. They left Syria, they went to Lebanon. And in Lebanon, because the marriage of the parents wasn't acknowledged by the Syrian state, their daughter was born stateless. It took her 30 years to receive a citizenship. She was studying secretly, basically, in an Armenian school, and then she started a campaign to receive her citizenship. Well, her story ended with a happy end. She became a Brazilian citizen, well, a long way from Syria. And I have to tell you, if you read her story, unfortunately, it was the Syrian crisis that led her to receive some kind of documents. So you see, just because two people loved each other and they had a child, actually they had 3 children, but there was Maha Mamo, who was born stateless. So there are many ways you become stateless, and of course, in order to change this, there is no excuse for us, because this is not a complex problem anymore. We all know that the refugee question we were talking about yesterday and a little bit today, it's very difficult. But there cannot be any excuse for ending statelessness, as it was proved to us by UNHCR, but a Madagascar example or a Kenyan example is that MPs and legislation have a very strong role on that. The first point I want to tell you, and I want to talk about, is that this campaign of the United Nations and of course of IPU and all countries and NGOs that are participating in ending statelessness by 2024 is a very important program, because it draws the attention of lawmakers to the importance of understanding what it means to be stateless. If you're stateless, you're invisible. You're invisible to everybody. Invisible to the healthcare system, to educational system. You can have dreams, but nobody's going to help to fulfill these dreams. It is even difficult for you to be buried. So this campaign, which was started by the United Nations and is supported by many, many countries to end statelessness, already drew the attention and constantly drawing the attention of lawmakers, NGOs, governments to the fact that there is this problem and it's very easy to solve. And here comes the second point I would like to talk about, that we as members of parliament, we are legislators and opinion leaders, and the solution exists. There's the solution. We all we have to do is start different laws in our own parliaments. Of course, we have to explore the very origins and the very basics of statelessness and find a good way, a good legislation to that, but there are very good practices to solve these problems. IPU, together with United Nations, UNHCR, collected some of the good practices in nationality laws to prevent and reduce statelessness. I hope you received and saw this little book. It was there outside, and our colleagues can have it. We have it in English, but it's already been published also in French. I'm looking at Karine. So you can have this book. This is before, of course, the campaign, but you already see very good examples how legislators can solve the problem. Of course, to solve the problem, you need the legal framework, because this is the first point, this is the first way you have to address the problem. Because, as it was already said, there are international conventions to and or to prevent statelessness, and of course nationality law and getting rid of the discrimination from nationality laws is the solution. So, for example, and this has been very often emphasized during our meetings of the IHR committee as well as different meetings, the gender-based discrimination is a huge problem we have been facing. Of course, this book, besides Madagascar and Kenya, which was presenting very, very good practices. There are other countries from this region which presented to the world very good practices about ending statelessness. One we have been very interestingly dealing with is child statelessness. Equatorial Guinea, for example, has a very good I can say very good example how it can be solved. As for gender-based discrimination, Kenya, Madagascar, Senegal, Morocco, Sierra Leone, and Algeria, and in the book you can find that, presented very good examples. And let me tell you one good example from Denmark, from my continent, for gender discrimination, because for many, many years the Danish legislation discriminated men. So those children who were born outside of wedlock and abroad couldn't, and the father was Danish, could not have the Danish citizenship. And we think we have to stand up for the rights of men, not just for rights of women. So after 2014, this legislation was changed in Denmark, and finally, men and women alike can pass their nationality to their children. So it is very, very important to have a gender neutralized nationality law, which possibly for many, many countries could solve the majority of the stateless situation. So MPs, members of parliament, have a very eminent role in initiating these good practices in the parliaments. And I'm sure the colleagues in this continent can even send, the legislation to other countries, to other members of parliament to help to solve the problem. But this is not the end, because it's one thing we have the law. This was, for example, showed in the situation of Kyrgyzstan. You also have to enforce that law. And we parliamentarians have a great power there. As it was mentioned during the EXCOM committee in 2019 in Geneva, there were 252 pledges by 66 states, namely 66 governments. And out of that, there were 148 pledges by African governments. Honorable colleagues, those pledges will become reality if they are not going to be only pledges, but it's going to be legislation. So when I'm talking about enforcement, it's our responsibility, it's members of parliament who can go to the government and either in written or in oral questions ask the governments, okay, you had these pledges during the EXCOM committee. Have you started the job on that? Have you started to eliminate those discriminations? Have you initiated any law we can support? And so I think this is very, very important that members of parliament not only start legislation, they also scrutinize and check, regularly question the governments on the implementation of these different laws. And also, it's not just by directly dealing with nationality law. Of course, we all know that nationality and the question of nationality have budgetary implications. So when you do your budget, you can there also influence your own government and your own country as far as statelessness or ending statelessness is concerned. So it's very, very important that besides having the nationality law and helping your governments to scrutinize the process, you also look at the budgetary part, and besides looking the budgetary part, I thought there was somebody asking a question. And besides, during the budgetary part, you help to build those organizations, local offices, which are important for people to receive these documents. And here let me refer again to you, to the Kyrgyz example. People were not moving anywhere. They were living up in the mountains, far from offices, and the very reason they became stateless is because nobody was going up to them. So the offices are also very, very important where people can receive these documents. So the practical part, again, let me refer to yesterday. It's one thing that what we do at national level, international, regional level, at the very local level with laws, with budgetary funds, we have to have people to get these documents because then pledges will remain pledges. And we will have nice conferences, we will have beautiful gatherings, very nice papers we can distribute, but those people in the mountains or out in the countryside will not have the documents. And if they don't have the documents, they are invisible. They will remain invisible to the local authorities, and they will remain visible to us as well. So now we see, let me put together like politically what we need to have. We need to have brave leadership and political will. So we come again back to the question of political will. Do we want to end statelessness by 2024? United Nations, a member of States of United Nations, said yes. So if we want to do that, we have 5 more years to do that. It depends on us, members of parliament, legislators, to end statelessness. Of course, we have to have the knowledge how to end, and we have to have the tool how to do that. We have very good examples from this continent, really, really, I would say, very progressive. I hail those progressive legislations about ending gender discrimination, like Madagascar, Kenya, and as I mentioned, other countries. We constantly scrutinize also in our committee, IPU committee, how his progress is made, and hopefully we can do that. And let me again show you this booklet where you can study a lot from, and Karina, our colleague, is going to help you with the booklet. And of course, we need partnership with our societies, and we need to build coalitions for a change, to gather best practices at regional level, at global level, and distribute and share it with each other. I'm not here to teach anybody. That's not my job. I'm here to study from you if you have any obstacles to know. So within the IPU, which is the world's largest organization of parliamentarians, to try to find common solutions to these problems, to end child statelessness, to end the statelessness of women, and to end the statelessness of those 10 million people who are, just like Mahamamo, want nothing else but fulfill their dream. So that's our job, dear colleagues, and we are at IPU ready to help you to collect good examples together with UNHCR, which has been very, very active on that. And I would like to thank you for doing that, and also I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Thank you very much. Before I open up the floor for discussion, Ms. Shahzad wants to make a few remarks from UNHCR.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for indulging me to follow my colleague's excellent comment on behalf of UNHCR on statelessness. I just wanted, if I may, to just globally contextualize a little bit this issue. Firstly, by very, very sincerely thanking both the honorable MPs from Kenya and from Madagascar for sharing their very valuable good practice with us, but also to the honorable MP from Hungary for highlighting a number of critical issues, including the face value of the invisibility of this issue, and by bringing to the fore concerns that Maha specifically, for example, shared. Indeed, she was actually one of, if not the keynote speaker at the executive committee of UNHCR when we had our high-level segment, and she spoke of her personal experience of what she went through as a stateless person, as a stateless child, and as a stateless adult, young adults and adults. Stories as simple as her being an incredibly great soccer player and being identified as the one who should be representing the team nationally and needing to go internationally to play soccer, but was not able to do that because she didn't have nationality and she didn't have a passport. So her stories really, I think, touch the hearts of the diplomats sitting in that room in Palais des Nations in Geneva. And I think that triggered a lot of strong sentiments that led to a lot of also commitments to see the I Belong campaign go through. So as we heard from Emmanuel, it is a very ambitious 10-year campaign to do away with statelessness within a 10-year time frame. But it wasn't ambitious for the sake of simply being ambitious. It was ambitious because UNHCR felt very strongly that through relatively simple changes in law, we could actually meet that objective within this 10-year mark. But I have to say, despite some really positive momentum during the mid-year campaign, during EXCOM, we still remain quite a bit far away from being able to reach our objectives. But to talk positively, I should say that we did see some incredible pledges globally at the high-level segment. We had over 340 pledges confirmed in writing from over 65 countries. And just for Africa, and I have to say, Africa submitted by far the highest number of pledges of any region. They submitted 140 pledges received from 34 African countries. And I have to say, we were delighted, for example, Kenya, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone pledging to completely resolve all remaining cases of statelessness on their territory. Eswatini and Liberia committing to remove gender discrimination from their nationality laws, and over 15 African states committing to pursue accession to one or both of the statelessness conventions. Now, I have to say these pledges were made by the governments, by the state. However, the vast majority are actually going to require legislative change. So the vast majority are actually going to require some kind of action from you sitting in this room when you go back to your respective parliaments. So UNHCR, what we've done is we've actually pulled together, just as a form of example, we've screened all of these pledges that have come from Africa, and led, in fact, I have to say, by Emmanuel, and to her credit. We've done this review where we've actually identified some 60 pledges from 33 African states that specifically require legislative action. And so what we were hoping is to actually see these pledges from the high-level segment carried over into the December Global Refugee Forum, so that these pledges that were made to the high-level segment could equally be seen as pledges made at the forum, and then have them be coupled with pledges from others who could come and support the implementation of those pledges made. For example, we heard, again, I think from the Honorable MP from Kenya, that, I think I heard that Africa needed to respond to its own context in this context and in this continent. There are so many great examples existing in Africa, and that we really hope that we could see pledges made at the GRF to support pledges made at the high-level segment to support their implementation. For example, we have a number of African countries, who is in this room present as well, who have recently changed their laws to do away with gender discrimination. We have a number of states in Africa who have committed to change their laws. So if we could couple these countries at the Global Refugee Forum and see pledges from both sides, both to make the change and the pledge to support, I think we can go forward within also the African context to see some important changes made. So I just wanted to make these points and thank you very sincerely for putting this agenda item on this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, I think we have listened to various experts on the question of statelessness and the issue of nationality and citizenship. I think we are now in a position to make intelligent contributions on the subject. But I must hasten to say that we have had about 5 presenters, so we don't wish to have new presentations. I will not hesitate to stop any speaker who would want to do another presentation. So we want short, sharp, and precise interventions during the discussions. So I'm now opening the floor for your contributions, questions, and inputs and discussions, comments. Please feel free. Any questions or comments on the issue of statelessness, citizenship, nationalities? I hope I did not intimidate.
Everybody's frightened.
Yes. Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Halima Mucheke. I'm a member of parliament from Kenya. First, let me appreciate the panelists and also the conveners of this important conference. Mine is just a concern on statelessness. I have heard what Diana said, but there are a few challenges that I have seen, especially with persons of Somali origin. Maybe because of the Al-Shabaab issues, we have seen that young people, when they present themselves for ID, to get IDs or even passports, they really have problems. Those are Muslims from Somali origin. They get a lot of problems, and at times, you don't know whether now they're supposed to be Kenyans or Somalis or what, and yet you find that their parents, both parents are Kenyans, but you find that the children are getting problems getting the identifications. So I don't know how this challenge is supposed to be faced or addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure the panelists will note the questions. If it is a contribution, we'll just note the contribution. But where there is a question, the panelists will obviously be noting the specific questions for eventual address. Thank you. Any more? Yes, Honorable Kone.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you for the floor, Chair. Honorable President, I'm going to come back to the first presentation. Obviously, when the presenter spoke about the 2 conventions, she presented us a map, giving an idea of the countries which have already adhered and those who have not joined yet. I'm very elated that my country is amongst the people, amongst the countries which have participated to that convention. My country, obviously, is Cote d'Ivoire. I'd like to know, what are the actions? What are the forms of sensitizations undertaken by the UNHCR to subjugate the countries to join this kind of convention? What are the advantages for the refugees as well as the stateless people. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
You have led by example, quite brief and to the point. Thank you. Yes, madam.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My intervention would be centered on the modifications of laws on nationalities, which I find pertinent, because I believe that should we not modify the laws on nationalities or citizenships, we are going to encourage the mushrooming of statelessness. Why am I saying this? Because often I see people, when they are in quest or when they are seeking for papers or asylum, they are being asked to bring the certificate of citizenship. And if they do not bring them, they may not have papers or documentation. And this very certificate of citizenship or nationality brings about issues, especially in the Western Africa, where we co-share a lot of names. My colleague from the example of Cote d'Ivoire and Mali, and Guinea-Conakry, we share names. We share a lot of names. In between us, Senegal and the two Guineas, the Gambia, we have the same issues. Sometimes you go to the tribunal and seeking for a certificate of citizenship, and to get that, you're going to suffer. I can assure you. If you are very lazy or you are a person who does not like confrontations, you're going to find yourself stateless. I have seen this. I've seen it in countries where kids are writing the exams. They cannot write their own exams because they had issues of certificate or birth certificates and certificate of nationalities. Hence, I request that we have modifications or laws on nationalities. You are Kone, Fadiga, Keita. We may find you in Mali, you are in Cote d'Ivoire. You are even in Liberia. And you need the paper, or you are in Mali and Cote d'Ivoire or in Guinea, and people are going through archives, checking and trying to sieve out your citizenship or nationalities, and you are unable even to travel or to have citizenship. This is a phenomenon which is vibrant in Senegal as well, because we have these names. If you are Bapo Diallo, they will try to see from which ethnicity Bao Diallo. You find them in Guinea Conakry. You find them even in Guinea-Bissau. I think this is a pertinent question to revisit the modification of laws in order to facilitate the people to recover their documentations so as to avoid that some of them remain stateless. It is very important to modify the laws. Otherwise, the remaining of the debates, I will leave my boss, my president of commission on the laws, to tackle it and to bring about relevant responses. Frankly, I must say, I've seen people suffering. I can assure you, in my own community, where we were taxated as if we are Lusophones, Mendy as Mendes, Da Costa, which are not our names. And if you have these names, to recover your citizenship, you are going to suffer. These are the questions that, as from ECO or Western Africa, are we not going to? Don't you think that you should have a meeting so as to bring about solutions to the hardships or difficulties which our citizens are facing and who are suffering to get the documentation? They cannot even write exams and cannot travel. This is a serious question that I'm bringing, and this will banish statelessness, the modification of laws on citizenships or nationalities. I thank you. I've been very long, Mr. Chair. Indulge me. Thank you.
I was going to stop you, but what you were talking was quite interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Honorable Kone.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Comme il n'y a pas...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since that we don't have many participants, you are not going to stop me to compensate itself, Mr. Chair, Honorable Chair. My question, the question of statelessness, it is extremely paramount. This very morning, the state minister Cheikh Adio spoke about Cote d'Ivoire on the renaissance of the resurgence of violence, political, thematic, and this is worrying us about the president's election 2020. He knows very well Cote d'Ivoire has been one of the mediators to referee conflicts in between Ivorians. It is true. With him, I need to acknowledge that political language or violent languages are now resurging because the president's elections will be held in October 2020. As well, there is an important question. I said it yesterday, and in the UNHCR mentioned it. We have almost 700,000 people risking to be stateless. There's been a law reform in Cote d'Ivoire on the declarations of birth and re-establishment of IDs and birth certificates. The opposition said promptly that the 700,000 people who received nationalities were incorporated for election purposes. What I would like to say, we need to disassociate the identity and election. I have participated UNHCR in Abidjan. The topic was, I'm looking for my identity card to vote. At the very moment that you are looking for your ID card for you to vote, it's no more the right of identity. It becomes a political issue on electioneering. Everyone is watching. Even the neighbor with whom we were exchanging yesterday was Ivorian. Because we are looking for mechanisms that to say it's not Ivorian because we believe that it's not going to vote for my candidate. We need to disassociate ID from electioneering campaigns. I say this is very important. Very often, the UNHCR is working, operating in our countries, but very rarely with the members of parliament. It is normal. It depends on how the restructuring of laws is made in our respective countries. Back home, I work with DARA, the Directorate of Foreign Affairs, statelessness. It is better to work with members of parliament in your sensitization works and in your works as well. Because the administration, the government, is not in contact daily. I can go to the prefects or the councillors, but the restitution is very difficult. Therefore, in national assemblies, the need to work with the deputies to have joint missions with those very member of parliament for the sensitization sur terrain, on terrain. We have evolved in Cote d'Ivoire with regard to the laws of identity, the laws of blood or of land. And a woman, most of the times, after a marriage, the husband can take up citizenship. It was because the moderator, the chair, is policing us. I'm going to stop here. We need to know that the identity policies in Cote d'Ivoire are badly exploited because as if we are trying to abuse the identities. Even in crossing, the immigrants, we are people that throw away the papers. They say, no, they are Ivorians. And people will say that there are 20 Ivorians in Morocco, in Spain. But they don't have even the Ivorians documentations because they say when they say that, they receive more sympathy. We need to be very vigilant in the politics of openness, the policies of openness. We are an open country. We do not close our borders, but we are a very just country. on identity and identification. We have evolved, made a lot of progress. We do not close our laws to foreigners or to citizenships. A distinction is very clear. Everybody knows where he or she must go. I'm requesting the UNHCR that identity must not be linked to electioneering. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kone. Yes.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم شكرا السيد رئيس.
Honorable Chair, and in the beginning, I thank all the presenters in this important session. I am a member from the National Council of Morocco, and my name is Tarki. I have listened to all the comments relating to statelessness, and I believe that this situation is a unique situation of human rights crisis. Those without a state have got a problem when it comes to education, medical care, and an inability to contribute economically from the employment. The numbers are very worrying when it comes to the figures in Africa. The exchange of ideas and experiences between the African states is the best mechanism by which we can overcome this crisis in Africa and among our brothers and sisters in Africa. And I reiterate here that the steps that are a number of member states have been able to achieve. And here I ask, what are the adopted mechanisms to increase the civil society's ability to deal with the statelessness, and also the additional financial aid to eliminate the burden of dealing with this problem? I assure you that the statelessness issue, if it was mentioned in Morocco, it will be dealt with very professionally. We do have a mechanism by which we deal with the African migrants. We have got a national strategy that has been based on the rules emanating from His Excellency the Minister in Migration, and I'm able to exchange ideas with all the member states by which we could collaborate better, especially for the issues relating to statelessness. And finally, in terms of our objection that we have raised when it comes to a member that is present in the meeting without having a list of the attendees, and hereby I ask from the Honorable President to diarize our reservation on this phenomenon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, the lady.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Can you hear me? السيدة?
Then we come to you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to commend all those who have presented on statelessness. And I'm also happy with the summary that was made by Madam Emmanuel. Also happy with the different experiences that have been shared. And I would like to make two contributions. I'm not going to be, I won't agree that we must limit to the essential cause of statelessness upon the law of nationality. And I believe it is maybe my old functions that brings me to say that I was the national director of in Senegal, and I participated in a lot of reflections upon statelessness and registration of birth. And I believe the first right is the right to be registered at birth. And I would like us to go a little further, because in our African countries today, we have a real problem of identification. We've got Africans who lives, who dies without being registered. They will not exist, they did not exist. And I believe, according to that, when it comes to statelessness, we need to go forward towards the registration of a birth. And secondly, I've noted, maybe others have noted other things. I've noted two preoccupations where we are asked to go, or we had one proposition of the role of the parliament. It is to convince to the ratification of the treaties, and as well, and to convince a government with reforms. And I believe the parliament has a mission at the level of the legislative procedures, a mission to encourage, to reform, and as well as we have a role of to controlling the action of the government, a role to follow up. Today, when these laws are taken, are they really applied? I think that is an aspect we need to take into account. And we also have another role, which is a role of awareness, is a way to the advocate towards the government, and we need to take that into consideration here, not only with the populations, but also at the level of deciders. The parliament can play a role to advocate. And I believe that today we can as well. When I looked at the map between parliamentaries, we can also play a role of advocacy by sharing experiences. Maybe other countries want to, but they do not have the tools. But the parliamentaries that, or for the countries that have already rectified or already have laws, they may share their experiences with other countries. Those are the contributions I wanted to do. I'm sorry for being a little longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can we try to summarize our interventions? Make sure that we are brief and to the point. We don't want to go right round in circles. Let us be brief and to the point. Yes, I recognize you.
In the name of Allah, the Mighty, the Greatest, thank you, Honorable Chair, and thanks to those who have presented their interventions. In the beginning, I have a number of observations, simple and quick observations. We admit that the statelessness problem is a big problem, and we consider it a necessity, because the identity creates loyalty. Without belonging, you are a lost person, and when you are lost, there is no job or creation or achievement, and therefore we add our voice to the humanitarian efforts to eliminate this problem effectively. It was mentioned in the third intervention, the discrimination, and it was restricting. In some cases, it was whether it is discrimination or no discrimination, we have to consider it to equate between the good and the bad, and to equate between the big and the small, and the good and the evil, and the gender and another, which, in other words, we do not need the equality in that way, but we are requesting justice, because justice is more conclusive than equality. In terms of certain, equality has injustice in it, and therefore we look at the justice as a more superior strive for us. And also the member who have presented her presentation number 3, we request that we are free to invite our countries to change their legislations and laws in whatever suitable for the needs of humanity. We are not just working on that, but we are saying that this is an objective that will not be achieved, as it was stated by the intervention, because in our legislations, which comes or emanates in constitutions, such constitutions are based on a point of departure. These sources could differ from one constitution to another. It differs from one country to another. So therefore, in order to achieve an answer in such an issue is a very difficult and complex matter. My final point is that for this Pan-African Parliament to work effectively so that we can all agree collectively, which is justice, then justice, then justice. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Any burning question? Yes?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not going to be long. Thank you once again for giving me, and thank you for those who spoke before me with positive contribution and precisely talking about statelessness. And I believe that my contribution is as follows. We're trying to solve a problem. We need to avoid creating other problems, more especially when it comes to modification of national laws on citizenship. I believe that I cannot. I'm preparing to a campaign of my country, and we took 3 years, and I believe that no article has been modified taking into account what the country has gone through recently. People are extremely susceptible, and what, as I would say, a question that can, but it's a question that we need to find the solutions. But I believe that the campaign of the UNHCR and the campaign that is being led on statelessness may bring other states such as ours. And you know that 4 years ago, there was a structure that was done for identification, but it has remained dormant up to today because people, they come into our country, in the evening they go back. You know, we've got 9 neighboring countries. Today it is this rebellious movement that comes out, and then I said it yesterday, and I believe that everything that we received as information, we are going to try to report back, but we are always saying that is a very delicate subject for us to modify the laws on nationality. But the most important one is the awareness on statelessness. That's at least there we will know who's who. But modifying or changing the national laws of my country today, I believe that it can create a lot of problems rather than results. So that is what I wanted to bring as a conclusion on this debate on statelessness, and principally on the modification of national laws. Thank you very much.
For your contributions. Now I'll ask our panelists to give their responses. I'll give each maximum of 2 minutes to wind up and give their responses. Then we'll take a tea break. Thank you. We'll start from my right. Thank you.
Deux minutes.
2 minutes to answer to these questions is a little bit like a campaign and long, but I'm actually going to try. In fact, I want to first answer to the last intervention because it is very interesting, very right in the sense that most often the debate when it comes to nationality is a passionate debate. It is a question of sensitivity and sovereignty. And I've heard, and I'm not a leader of a very poor country with a law of the nationality that is very exclusive. And we were discussing with the leaders of that government that no, we are not going to remove discrimination in the law. Otherwise, everyone will want to ask for the nationality or citizenship of our country. Countries such as France, the United Kingdom, United States, amongst the law of nationality that is broad. A country such as the United States practices the law of the land, the right of the land. What we need to keep in mind, you need to remove passion from this debate. We must not look at the things that are talking about getting nationality, but to focus on the right of citizenship. But we are talking about statelessness, not citizenship. It is about to protect the human right of nationality by avoiding situations of statelessness. We really have to keep that in mind when we go into a debate when it comes to the reforming of legislations. Members of the Parliament of Côte d'Ivoire, and they asked what was the work that was being done to bring all those states that have not yet ratified these conventions. So the awareness is being done in all the countries, and the good news, as we told you earlier on, is that many African countries have taken the commitment last October to adhere to all the 2 conventions about statelessness from up to 2024, and these conventions are very important to reach the goal of the campaign. So the Convention of 1954 protects the fundamental right of stateless people, and the Convention of 1961, if it is put in practice in all the states of the world, it is a very important tool to end statelessness, because the Convention of 61 encompasses the legal bindings in order to avoid and not but to avoid the situation of statelessness. When a child that is found forsaken, we need to protect that child who otherwise was going to be stateless or otherwise won't have a future. Mr. President, I've heard your message, so I'm going to stop here.
Well, you have done very well, and you have covered all the issues raised. Right, Madam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, let me thank everybody who was presenting either good practices or the problems, because it's very, very important we know about the problems. Let me tell you that in my country, it was 1848 for the first time when men could vote on elections. Women, just like those who committed robbery, smuggling, or were criminals, they couldn't vote. It was 1918 when the first time women could vote in Hungary. And finally, when we had universal suffrage, it was 1947. The reason why I'm saying this is that for many, many years, a lot of things we were not thinking about because it was not existing, it was not a problem. And it took a long, long time and a very strong fight to change legislation. And here I am, a female parliamentarian, who's sitting in the parliament, in the Hungarian parliament since 2002, so I'm quite now an old parliamentarian in the Hungarian parliament. The reason why I'm saying this is, yes, I understand the cultural problems. Yes, I understand identity questions. It's very, very important, and we have to deal with that. But when we are talking about stateless people, we are talking about the ones who want to have citizenship because they want to be visible, and not because they want to use that citizenship for bad purposes. So I think it's very, very important. I think my colleague from the IHR committee, the Senegalese colleague, pointed out that we have to have maybe more localized, more focused discussions to solve statelessness, because even here we see different views why this problem is difficult to solve. Some might say because of identity, some might say because of the question of gender equality. I believe in gender equality. It's very, very important, because in front of God or in front of the United Nations, we all created equal. In front of law, we should be equal. It's very, very important. We should be equal. It doesn't matter if I'm a woman, it doesn't matter if anybody else is a man. What counts is that we are human beings. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says we have equal rights. So what I think we should do, maybe with UNHCR, with IPU, is start organizing like really very regional conferences to identify these problems, to identify these challenges you face in your countries and find the best solution. Maybe it's not legislation to nationality law. Maybe it's just legislation to a special administrative law to establish birth certificate centers. It's possible. But then let's talk about that, colleagues, because we want to end statelessness. Your governments made it clear that by 2024 we want to end statelessness. Let this not only be a pledge, not a promise, but finally something we do with action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Finally, we can hear from Nairobi, from Diana, on her responses.
Thank you very much, Chair, and very useful contribution from the honorable members of parliament from the African continent. To respond to the Somali question, I would say today's discussion we've not dwelt much on persons at risk of statelessness, who are the majority in Africa. Why? Because most people do not have proof. They do not have identity document, and most importantly, most common law countries in Africa, they do not have a certificate of nationality like the civil law jurisdiction. So like back home in Kenya, there's not a single document that is conclusive proof of my citizenship. And that's the question that ails Kenyan Somalis because of the porous border and the high migration rate, the refugee question. We have no way of proving. So a recommendation to our region and Africa is to echo what the member of parliament from Senegal said, that we need to invest in determining nationality right from birth. So if we can give citizens who are children proof of citizenship, say in their birth certificate, or issue a certificate of nationality soon thereafter, that would be a helpful safeguard. I've also had the members question the issues, striking the balance between discrimination, justice, and so on. If it means equity to get to where we are, and I don't think it would ever be qualified to discriminate members of our population. They are actually, in most instances, our own. I didn't have a chance to get to interact with all of us. But if you look at our borders that were then given to us during the Scramble and Partition of Africa, and which we now defend, that are very straight. Even our rivers were not boundaries enough. A river at one point of meandering will be in Zambia, the next one it is in Zimbabwe, is a true testament to our identity problems. And whereas we might be worried that changing the laws or putting in place administrative or policy mechanism to resolve statelessness could destabilize the country, in some instances in Africa, failure to do anything has actually also gotten to the point of destabilizing. But most importantly, we've had the story of the stateless lady from Brazil. We have our own African stories. If you interact, if you're a member of parliament and within your constituents, not just your state, you interact with a stateless person and realize the type, how vulnerable, how terribly they live, how they lack dignity, how they are not visible. We recently buried an old man who was 97 years and who trekked seeking an identity, a Kenyan identity. He died still very poor, but he was very proud that at the point he was being buried, he will be identified as having lived, because he will be issued a death certificate, and like all the other people of that community who had died before, who died without any trace that they ever existed. Let's recognize every single person on the African continent. Thank you, and I welcome the regional discussion, maybe based on the existing regional blocks or the formations that have been formed after a mapping of the statelessness situations and populations at risk and how they interact with neighboring states.
Thank you very much. Can we give a pam-pam to our presenters and all the discussants? Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, we shall take a short tea break, 5 minutes, then come back for the next session. 5 minutes, come back for the next session. Thank you.